Welcome to Rock and Roll Odd and Interesting, bringing some of rock and roll's craziest stories and history to life. Today's episode is about a guitar that was missing for nearly half a century. But not just any guitar, a famous one that had been on stage at Woodstock, the Ed Sullivan Show, and countless other places from the US to England. As some of you guessed, the guitar I'm talking about is John Fogerty's 1969 Rickenbacker 325. The guitar had a sunburst finish with a Bigsby that John added himself. So why'd this guitar go missing for 44 years? To be able to answer that question, we gotta go back to the late 60s. John first got his hands on a Rickenbacker in 1967 when his brother Tom traded in two fenders and a Supro for a black 325. Now in those days, a black 325 was most closely related to John Lennon, and still remains the same today. Now in 67, John was still on active duty in the Army, and no one really knew what was coming. But that was all about to change the following year. Now the black 325 played a lot of songs on Creedence's first record, including I Put a Spell on You, Susie Q, and many others from the record. Now John quickly became upset with the whammy bar attached to the 325 and gave it away on stage to a kid in 68. And that's where the Sunburst 325 enters the story. John bought this guitar directly from a Rickenbacker showroom in Los Angeles, California. Now it's said that he played 7 or 8 325s till he finally selected this one. Little did people know it was about to go down in rock and roll history. Now shortly after purchasing it, he decided to add an old school Bigsby to it, along with one of the most legendary pickups of the time, the Gibson PAF. PAF stood for Patent Applied For. As a humbucking pickup, it's still one of the most copied styles to this day. Now with John's new Rick all ready to go, it was time to hit the road. Now for most of 68 up until around October, CCR played most of their shows in California. They played alongside acts such as the Beach Boys and Steppenwolf, playing shows anywhere from the San Francisco International Pop Festival to Fillmore West to Watermelon Feeds. As CCR was beginning to build traction, they were gearing up for what would become their biggest year yet. Enter 1969. Released in January, Bayou Country would be one of 3 albums released that year, going all the way up to number 7 on the US charts. Green River would shortly follow in August, going all the way to number 1. This would be their first album to hit number 1 on the US charts. And the final one, Willie and the Poor Boys, released in November of 69. And that's where our Rick 325 starts to become famous. It was played on all 3 of these albums, and taken on the road to play live. In March of 69, CCR would appear on the Ed Sullivan Show, as you can see John wielding his Rick 325. This would be the first of 2 times CCR would play on the Ed Sullivan Show, coming back in November. But before that, it was time for one of the biggest and most talked about musical festivals of all time, Woodstock. With big names to play, so was CCR. On August 17th, at around 12:30 in the morning, CCR had their chance to take the stage, playing to nearly 500,000 people. John's Rick 325 was heavy in the guitar rotation. Another guitar that seen extensive use was a Gibson Les Paul Custom Black Beauty, but more on that guitar for another video. Anyways, back to the Rick 325. John's main purpose for the Rick 325 was playing and recording for standard tuning songs, as opposed to his Black Beauty where he'd play half step or whole step down. Now 1970 would bring yet another number 1 US chart topping album, The Cosmos Factory, in which, you guessed it, John would use the Rick 325 to record. During 1969 and 1970, CCR would go on to outsell the Beatles, making them truly one of the biggest bands of the time. In 1970, CCR would find themselves playing the Royal Albert Hall, a very prestigious venue in London, in which both the Rick 325 and the Gibson Black Beauty were a part of. In late 70, CCR would go on to release Pendulum, a decent selling album, going all the way up to number 5 on the charts. This album included Have You Ever Seen the Rain, which just recently passed 1 billion streams on Spotify, joining a very prestigious group of artists and songwriters. By 1972, things weren't looking as good for the band, with the release of Mardi Gras not doing as good as it expected, and tensions high in the band, they decided to break up. And it was in 73 or 74 which no one really knows exactly when, but this is when the guitar was given away. John had given it to some kids at a rehearsal space. And just like that, this widely famous and piece of rock and roll history was lost. Now, sometime in the mid-80s, John had a chance to buy this guitar back from Norm's Vintage and Rare Guitars. With an asking price of $40,000, John turned it down, and the guitar went missing again for around another 20 years. That is, until his wife decided to go on the hunt for it. She ended up coming across the guitar in Ohio and was able to gift it to John as a Christmas present. It's said that the first song he played on this guitar after receiving it as a present was the solo from Green River. And that's the story of John Fogerty's Rickenbacker 325. I thank you all for watching, and if you have any stories you'd like to hear told, leave them in the comments, and don't forget to hit subscribe. Thanks again for watching. We'll see you in the next one.